The princess takes the handkerchief after a moment's hesitation. Up close, James notices the intricate patterns etched into her silvery skin, markings that pulse with faint bioluminescence. Unlike her father's scales that radiate psychic power, hers appear dormant, barely glowing. "Your compassion is unexpected," she says, her voice carrying a musical quality, despite her obvious distress, though ultimately pointless. James stands his ground despite feeling the weight of hostile stares from across the chamber. "Where I come from, compassion is never pointless. Then your species understands very little about galactic politics." Lyra rises to her feet with surprising grace. Standing, she towers over James by nearly a foot. "This display wasn't about me failing the trials. It was about making an example." A group of Arcturian nobles approaches, their elaborate ceremonial armor clicking with each step. The leader, distinguishable by the crown of psychic amplifiers circling his head, sneers down at James. "Ambassador Parker, isn't it? How fitting that Earth sends its representative to collect our discards." His translator fails to capture the full contempt in his tone, but the meaning comes through clearly enough. James straightens his posture, ignoring the way the noble's psychic aura makes his skin prickle uncomfortably. "I was merely offering assistance to someone in distress, Lord High Chancellor Vexor, Chief Advisor to His Majesty." The noble doesn't extend any gesture of greeting. A word of caution, human. On Arcturus, those who fail to reach their potential are not considered worthy of acknowledgement. By engaging with the former princess, you lower your already questionable status. Lyra's expression hardens, but she remains silent, her eyes fixed on a distant point. "I appreciate your concern for my diplomatic standing," James replies evenly. "But Earth evaluates worth differently. We believe potential can take many forms." The High Chancellor's eyes narrow. "How charmingly primitive. Perhaps that explains why your species took so long to achieve even basic interstellar travel." He turns to his companions, who respond with appropriate sounds of amusement. As they walk away, James notices how the other delegates part before them. Some bowing, others averting their gaze entirely. The power dynamics are clear. Arcturus holds significant influence in the council. "You shouldn't have done that," Lyra says quietly. "Vexor never forgets a slight, and he considers your very existence an insult to proper galactic hierarchy." "I was only being human," she finishes for him. "Yes, the council finds your species' behaviors quite entertaining. Your tendency toward emotional displays, your insistence on aiding the weak, your puzzling concept of fairness, all delightful curiosities to the established powers." For the first time, James feels the true weight of Earth's position in the galactic order. Not just new, but fundamentally alien in values and outlook. He watches as Lyra gathers the torn remnants of her royal insignia, carefully placing them in a small pouch. "What happens to you now?" he asks. Her expression turns distant. "I become nothing. Without royal standing, without psychic ability, I have no place in Arcturian society. Perhaps I'll be assigned to some distant outpost, where my embarrassing existence won't remind the king of his disappointment." Before James can respond, his communication device pulses with an urgent message from Earth Command. "Proceed with extreme caution. Initial diplomatic assessment indicates Arcturus-Earth relations critical to security position. Avoid all controversial engagements." Too late for that, James thinks, watching Lyra's retreating figure and feeling the lingering stares of council members who had witnessed his interaction with the disgraced princess. He couldn't know it then, but that simple act of offering a handkerchief had just altered the trajectory of two civilizations. James spends the night reviewing Earth's limited intelligence on Arcturus royal protocols. The information is woefully incomplete, most of it based on observations rather than direct cultural exchange. By morning, he's no closer to understanding why the king would place his disgraced daughter under human supervision. A soft chime interrupts his research. The embassy's eye announces, "Princess Lyra requests entry to the common area." He finds her standing rigidly in the center of the room, dressed in simple gray attire stripped of royal insignia. In the light of the embassy's Earth-calibrated illumination, her skin appears almost translucent, the dormant bioluminescent patterns forming intricate constellations across her visible skin. "I require clarification on several matters," she states without preamble. "What duties am I expected to perform as your ward?" She pronounces the last word with evident distaste. James gestures toward a seating area. "I'm as confused as you are. Earth wasn't consulted before this arrangement was announced. Yet you didn't refuse." "Diplomatically, I couldn't. Earth's position in the Council is precarious at best." Lyra remains standing. "Then we are both pawns. How fitting." The embassy's security system chimes again. "Ambassador, High Chancellor Vexor requests immediate entry." Security protocols indicate this is unusual for the time cycle. James straightens his uniform. "Grant access." Vexor strides in without waiting for a formal welcome. Two guards flanking him. His psychic amplifiers hum with barely contained energy that makes the room's electronics flicker. "Ah, I see the arrangement is proceeding. Excellent." He circles Lyra slowly, examining her as one might inspect livestock. "The king has instructed me to deliver your expectations, Ambassador. The former princess is to be integrated into human customs and activities. She will attend all diplomatic functions as part of your delegation. Her progress, or lack thereof, will be documented in quarterly reports to the throne." "I'm not a science experiment," Lyra says quietly. Vexor continues as if she hadn't spoken. "You are forbidden from allowing her access to Arcturian technology or cultural artifacts. The separation must be complete." He produces a metallic circlet. "This monitoring device will ensure compliance." James steps between them. "That wasn't mentioned in our agreement." "There was no agreement, Ambassador. There was a royal decree. The distinction is significant." Vexor's expression hardens. "The monitoring is non-negotiable." James feels a diplomatic crisis building but can't see a way out. What exactly does this device do? It restricts access to secured areas and monitors her location. Nothing invasive. The smile that accompanies this statement suggests otherwise. Lyra's voice cuts through the tension. "It also contains neural inhibitors designed to trigger pain responses if I attempt to access certain types of technology. A standard practice for disgraced nobles." James feels his temper rising. "Absolutely not. Earth jurisdiction applies within this embassy, and we don't permit torture devices." Vexor's psychic amplifiers flare. "You misunderstand your position, human. This isn't a negotiation." "Actually, it is." James accesses his datapad, quickly scanning diplomatic protocols. According to Council Bylaw 347, any species may apply their own cultural protection standards to diplomatic dependents within their jurisdiction. He looks up. "Unless you'd like me to request a council ruling on the matter." Publicly. The High Chancellor's expression shifts microscopically. The threat of public scrutiny, especially after the scene in the council chamber, carries weight. "The king will be most displeased," Vexor finally says, returning the circlet to his aide. "I suspect you'll find your diplomatic initiatives encountering unexpected resistance in coming cycles." After they leave, Lyra studies James with new intensity. "That was unexpected. You've made a dangerous enemy to protect someone you don't know or need." "I don't need a reason to oppose torture," James replies, but realizes the concept might be foreign to her culture. "Look, while you're here, you'll be treated according to Earth standards. That means basic dignity, regardless of your status." For the first time, Lyra's perfect composure slips. She looks genuinely confused. "Why would you risk diplomatic standing for principle?" "Because that's what humans do," James responds, not entirely sure if that's true, but wanting it to be. "Welcome to the Earth Embassy, Princess Lyra. Things work differently here." The workshop James establishes for Lyra begins as little more than a repurposed storage room. He requisitions basic Earth tools and salvages discarded technology from other embassies, items considered obsolete by advanced species, but still valuable to humans. What starts as a gesture of goodwill transforms as Lyra's true abilities emerge. Within weeks, the room becomes unrecognizable. Workbenches line the walls, covered with partially disassembled devices from a dozen worlds. Holographic schematics float in carefully organized clusters. The air hums with the subtle vibration of energy fields Lyra has somehow managed to stabilize using equipment never designed for such purposes. James pauses in the doorway, watching her work. Her movements possess a hypnotic precision, hands moving so quickly they occasionally blur, adjusting microcircuits without magnification tools that other species would require. Earth Command is asking questions about our power consumption, he says, breaking her concentration. Apparently, we're drawing 30% more energy than our allocation permits. Lyra doesn't look up from the delicate component she's modifying. I've been meaning to address that inefficiency. Your Earth power converters waste nearly 40% of their intake through heat dispersion. That's actually cutting-edge technology by our standards. Her hands pause briefly. I forget sometimes how new your species is to interstellar technology. She sets down her tools and gestures toward a device in the corner. I've been developing an alternative. It should reduce your embassy's power requirements by 60% while increasing output. James examines the unassuming metal cylinder, recognizing components from at least 3 different technological traditions. Is this why our lights have been getting brighter even though we've been reducing the settings? A side effect of cleaner energy conversion. A hint of pride enters her voice. Though I'd classify it as a feature rather than a flaw. He laughs. On Earth, we call that spinning the bug, turning a problem into a selling point. An accurate assessment. Lyra hesitates, then activates a secured holographic display. I've been developing something else that might interest you. The display shows a 3-dimensional schematic of what appears to be the embassy's communication array, but with significant modifications. James studies it, his limited technical knowledge struggling to comprehend the implications. Your communication system is primitive by Council standards, Lyra explains. The more advanced species can easily intercept and decode your transmissions, despite your encryption. That's concerning. It's by design. Her expression hardens. The Council believes in technological hierarchies. Species are allowed to advance only at a pace the senior members consider appropriate. James feels a chill. You're saying they deliberately keep us limited, while simultaneously mocking your limitations. She manipulates the display, highlighting her modifications. This redesign would make your communications virtually undetectable using quantum entanglement principles. No interception possible because there's no transmission to intercept. That's decades beyond Earth's capabilities. Yes, Lyra meets his eyes directly, and implementing it would violate at least 6 Council technology transfer restrictions. James understands the unspoken question. Why show me this if it's illegal to implement? Because the restrictions exist to maintain power imbalances, not security concerns. Her fingers trace the outline of the schematic. My people have used these hierarchies to dominate others for centuries. I assumed this was natural law, until I observed how differently humans approach knowledge. How so? You share information freely among your kind, regardless of status. Your scientific archives are accessible to any human with basic education. Even your diplomatic briefings are distributed to your entire staff, not just leadership. James considers this. That's just normal for us. It's revolutionary everywhere else. Lyra deactivates the display. I've come to believe the greatest weapon in the galaxy isn't psychic ability or advanced technology. It's the free exchange of knowledge. Something shifts in James's understanding, both of Lyra and the larger galactic dynamics Earth has blindly entered. If we implemented these modifications, you would gain communication security the Council believes you're centuries from achieving. Her expression remains neutral, but her dormant bioluminescent patterns pulse slightly brighter. The choice is yours, Ambassador. In that moment, James recognizes that what began as a diplomatic embarrassment has evolved into something far more significant, potentially a turning point in humanity's galactic position. Show me how it works, he decides. All of it. The aftermath of the emergency creates a strange limbo. While station administrators process the evidence against the core Imperium diplomats, James and Lyra find themselves in a secured conference room, ostensibly for their protection. The transparent security measure doubles as containment, keeping them isolated until the Council decides how to respond to their unauthorized intervention. 6 hours, James mutters, checking the time display for the dozenth time. How long does it take to verify we saved everyone's lives? Lyra sits perfectly still, her posture betraying no impatience. They're not debating whether we prevented disaster. They're debating how to acknowledge it without legitimizing our methods. Politics over survival. Charming. It's more complex than that. Lyra's fingers trace invisible patterns on the table. My actions demonstrated technological aptitude that contradicts centuries of Arcturian propaganda about psychic superiority. Some council species now have evidence that my father's empire has been misleading about the basis of their technological achievements. A soft chime interrupts them as the door slides open. Instead of the security detail they expect, High Chancellor Vexor enters alone. His psychic amplifiers have been deactivated, a gesture that could indicate either respect or caution. Interesting day, he says, his translator struggling to convey the layered irony in his tone. The former princess who can't access the psychic plane somehow accesses secured station systems beyond most engineers' comprehension. James straightens. She saved everyone on this station, including, conveniently, herself. Vexor places a data crystal on the table. Kane Zorax has reviewed the preliminary reports. He finds the situation problematic. Lyra's expression remains impassive. I imagine discovering that one's failed offspring prevented a diplomatic catastrophe would be problematic for his narrative. Indeed, the High Chancellor's gaze shifts between them. The king has authorized me to offer terms. James feels tension building in his shoulders. What kind of terms? The official record will state that Arcturian security forces detected the sabotage and deployed specialized emergency protocols. Princess Lyra's involvement will not be mentioned. In exchange, she will return to Arcturus for reintegration. Reintegration. James echoes. A process to ensure her talents are properly aligned with imperial interests. Vexor explains smoothly. The king recognizes that certain mechanical aptitudes, while inferior to psychic mastery, may have limited utility. Lyra's bioluminescent patterns flicker rapidly, the first time James has seen them respond so actively. You mean containment and exploitation. I've seen the reintegration facilities, Chancellor. Few emerge with their minds intact. James stands, anger overriding diplomatic caution. She's under Earth's protection. The agreement was always temporary. Vexor interrupts. The king's daughter has demonstrated value. He reclaims his property. I am not property. Lyra's voice remains controlled, but the temperature in the room seems to drop several degrees. Vexor ignores her, addressing James. Consider your position carefully, Ambassador. Earth remains the newest, weakest voice in the Council. This incident with the core Imperium creates opportunity for alignment of interests, protection for your developing worlds in exchange for one displaced princess. James feels the weight of impossible choices. His diplomatic training screams to find compromise, to protect Earth's interests. But something deeper, perhaps the same instinct that made him offer a handkerchief to a kneeling princess, rebels against the calculation. The agreement places Princess Lyra under Earth's protection until she chooses otherwise, he says carefully. Has she indicated such a choice to you, Chancellor? Vexor's expression darkens. You misunderstand the nature of choice in this matter. Actually, I understand perfectly. James activates his communication implant. Security, Ambassador Parker. I'm invoking Diplomatic Protection Protocol Epsilon for a member of the Earth delegation. Lockdown access to conference room Delta 7. The High Chancellor's psychic amplifiers begin to power up despite station regulations. You make a grave error, human. One your planet may not survive. Possibly, James acknowledges, feeling strangely calm despite the threat. But I'm making it anyway. As security alerts begin to sound, Lyra looks at him with an expression he can't quite decipher. Why? She asks softly. Why risk everything? Because some things matter more than politics, James answers, and no one gets to own another person. Not where I come from. The Earth Embassy transforms overnight into a diplomatic fortress. Additional security personnel arrive from the human colony on Europa, ostensibly for a scheduled rotation. Engineering teams install enhanced shield generators, officially classified as environmental regulators, to avoid Council technology restrictions. James knows these measures will provide only symbolic protection if Arcturus decides to move against them directly. In his office, he studies intelligence reports streaming in through the secure channel Lyra modified. The Arcturian royal court has gone into unprecedented lockdown. 3 high-ranking nobles with ties to Vexor have disappeared from public view. Interstellar markets show suspicious movement of assets from Arcturian-controlled funds to anonymous accounts beyond Council jurisdiction. They're preparing for something, he mutters as Lyra enters. War, most likely, she replies with disturbing calm, setting down a device that emits a soft hum. This will counteract any quantum resonance scanners. We can speak freely for exactly 7 minutes. James rubs his temples. Your father wouldn't risk war with Earth over a custody dispute. It's not about me. Lyra activates a holographic display showing shipping routes near the galactic rim. It's about timing. My father needs these weapons deployed before the Council's inspection cycle. With the core Imperium implicated in the station sabotage, security focus has shifted to their territory, creating a blind spot. Precisely. Her fingers manipulate the display, highlighting 3 uninhabited systems. These are the likely staging areas. Remote, minimal monitoring, positioned for rapid deployment to either Council or non-aligned worlds. James studies the data, recognizing the strategic implications. If he succeeds, Arcturus controls the most devastating weapons in known space. Lyra finishes. The balance of power shifts permanently. The implications hit James with physical force. We need to bring this to the Council immediately. With what evidence? Lyra's expression hardens. My testimony. The word of a disgraced princess against a high king. The modified communications array that violates Council restrictions. We'd be imprisoned before reaching the Council chamber. The device on the table emits a soft warning tone. 4 minutes remaining, she notes. James paces the limited confines of his office. There must be a way to expose this without starting a war. Perhaps there is. Lyra hesitates, then activates a secondary display showing what appears to be ancient Arcturian script. These are the tournament protocols for succession challenges, last invoked 3 centuries ago, but never formally rescinded. You're suggesting challenging your father directly. James stares at her in disbelief. You said yourself the trials are designed specifically for psychic abilities you don't possess. True, but the protocols contain an interesting provision. She highlights a section of text. A challenger may compete using any natural or developed ability originating from their personal essence. And that helps because for centuries, no one has challenged the definition of personal essence. Arcturian tradition assumes it refers exclusively to psychic potential. A rare smile touches her lips, but the legal language doesn't specify that. James begins to understand. You're saying your technological aptitude could qualify. It's a legal gray area, one that would force public examination of succession laws. Her expression grows serious. More importantly, it would create a legitimate path for me to publicly question my father's actions. Tournament participants receive temporary diplomatic immunity from prosecution or imprisonment. The security device chimes again. 1 minute. James studies her face, searching for doubt. This is incredibly dangerous. If you fail, I won't be alive to regret it, she acknowledges. But the alternative is watching my father plunge the galaxy into unprecedented conflict while we hide behind shields that won't hold against determined attack. The realization of her courage leaves James momentarily speechless. This isn't the reluctant ward he first met, but a strategist willing to risk everything to prevent catastrophe. The tournament announcement goes out tomorrow. Lyra continues. I need to know if Earth will sponsor my challenge. Without official backing from a council species, I cannot register. The device gives its final warning. In moments, their conversation will become vulnerable to surveillance again. I'll need to consult with Earth Command. James begins, but sees the flash of disappointment in her eyes. Making his decision, he reaches for her hand. The first time he's initiated physical contact with her. But my recommendation will be unequivocal support. We stand with you, Lyra. For the briefest moment, her bioluminescent patterns pulse with vibrant color, illuminating the space between them with unexpected beauty. Thank you, she says simply as the security field dissolves around them. The second day of the tournament brings an atmosphere of barely contained chaos. Lyra's unexpected success in the first trial has shattered the narrative of certain failure. Betting syndicates across the station scramble to adjust odds. Council species that had dismissed the event as a foregone conclusion now send observers to witness what many are calling the technological heresy. James navigates through the crush of spectators, diplomatic credentials barely creating enough space to reach the preparation chambers. Security is tight. Arcturian royal guards flank every entrance, their psychic scanners sweeping constantly for threats. He finds Lyra calibrating the neural interface she used in yesterday's trial, her fingers making microscopic adjustments to circuitry no human could manipulate without tools. The council is buzzing, he tells her. 3 different species have approached Earth about technology exchange programs. Apparently, your interface design has some rethinking their dismissal of primitive approaches. They're missing the point, Lyra responds without looking up. It's not about technology versus psychic ability. It's about integration versus separation. James notices the dark circles beneath her eyes. Did you sleep at all? Sleep is inefficient when preparing for the ancestral knowledge trial. She finally looks at him. The historical archives I need to access are heavily guarded. Last night I had to bypass 17 security protocols just to download the uncensored records. Uncensored. Lyra's expression hardens. Arcturian history is curated carefully. The official archives contain only approved narratives that support the current power structure. She activates a small projector, showing images of ancient texts. These are the original records, preserved by a secret scholarly tradition. They tell a very different story about my father's rise to power. James studies the unfamiliar script. How different? The official history records that my grandfather died of natural neural degradation, passing the throne peacefully to my father as the most psychically gifted heir. Her voice remains steady, but her bioluminescent patterns dim noticeably. These records show he actually died with 7 other potential successors during a diplomatic summit. All exhibited identical neural failure patterns consistent with targeted quantum destabilizer exposure. You're saying your father murdered his way to the throne using the same weapons he now seeks to deploy on a galactic scale. She deactivates the projector and documented his methods with enough technical detail to prove intention. James feels a chill. Presenting this publicly could trigger immediate retaliation, which is why I have implemented countermeasures. Lyra gestures to several innocuous-looking devices positioned around the room. If my vital signs indicate termination or my neural patterns show tampering, these will broadcast the complete records to every council species simultaneously. The tournament warning chimes sound through the chamber. 5 minutes until the second trial begins. The risk you're taking, James begins, is necessary, she finishes. My father's faction gains strength daily. The weapons are nearly positioned. This may be our only opportunity to prevent widespread devastation. As she gathers her equipment, James notices a subtle tremor in her hands, the first sign of physical uncertainty he's witnessed. Acting on instinct, he reaches out to steady her. "Whatever happens in there, Earth stands with you," he says firmly. "And not just Earth. I've been working diplomatic channels since yesterday. The Quar delegation, the Marathi Collective, and 3 independent systems have all signaled support pending today's outcome." Surprise registers briefly on her face. How? The major powers have been aligned with Arcturus for centuries. Apparently, some have grown tired of the status quo. Your performance yesterday gave them something they've lacked, an opportunity to shift alliances without losing face. He smiles slightly. As one Quar representative put it, supporting technological innovation is less embarrassing than admitting they've been intimidated by psychic displays for generations. For the first time since he's known her, Lyra laughs, a musical sound that momentarily transforms her serious demeanor. Political convenience masquerading as principle. How very counsel. "Whatever works," James replies. "Just focus on surviving this trial. The galactic landscape is shifting, but it doesn't matter if you don't make it through today." The final warning chime sounds. Lyra's expression returns to determined focus as she secures the last components of her presentation system. "Today, Ambassador Parker, we rewrite history, quite literally." She moves toward the entrance to the trial chamber, pausing briefly at the threshold. "If I don't return, the emergency protocols in your embassy will activate automatically. The evidence against my father will reach you through secured channels." Before James can respond, she steps through the doorway, back straight and head high, to face a tradition designed to defeat her, armed with nothing but truth and innovation against centuries of psychic intimidation. The emergency session of the Galactic Council stretches into its 6th hour. What began as a procedural hearing on tournament validity has transformed into the most significant political crisis in 3 centuries. Species that have maintained neutrality for generations now take sides openly. Ancient alliances fracture under the weight of Lyra's evidence. In the diplomatic observation gallery, James watches the proceedings with Earth's ambassador-at-large, Helena Chen, who arrived via emergency transport only hours earlier. Her presence signifies Earth's recognition of the situation's gravity. "You've created quite the diplomatic inferno, Parker," she remarks, her expression unreadable as she studies the council floor. Earth High Command wasn't pleased to learn about our suddenly central role in galactic politics. "With respect, Ambassador, we didn't create this situation," James responds. "We simply refuse to ignore it. A distinction that will matter little if we end up on the losing side." She gestures toward where King Zorax sits surrounded by his faction. Despite being technically under investigation, his psychic presence dominates his section of the chamber. His supporters control 30% of council votes and influence another 20%. The evidence is compelling, but politics rarely yields to truth alone. James watches as species representatives huddle in tense discussions. The Quar delegation has committed to supporting Lyra's position. The Marathi as well. Traditional counterweights to Arcturus, Ambassador Chen acknowledges, but insufficient without broader coalition. A subtle vibration from James's secure communicator interrupts them. The message from Lyra is characteristically brief. "Secondary evidence deployment complete. Monitor channels 7 to 12. As if on cue, diplomatic aides throughout the chamber react to incoming transmissions. Data tablets illuminate with new information. The chamber's ambient noise level rises as dozens of conversations break out simultaneously. "What just happened?" Ambassador Chen demands. Before James can respond, the massive data screens surrounding the council floor activate without authorization. The Quar Cherubim's crystalline form vibrates in surprise as their control panel overrides are bypassed. The screens display shipping manifests, financial transactions, and surveillance footage, all documenting the connection between Arcturus royal accounts and the deployment of quantum destabilizers to frontier systems. Unlike Lyra's testimony, this evidence comes not from ancient history, but from the past 30 days. She held back evidence. James realizes aloud. She presented the historical case first, knowing her father would activate his support network to discredit it, forcing them to publicly commit to positions that this new evidence directly contradicts. Ambassador Chen finishes, a note of reluctant admiration entering her voice. Clever. On the council floor, King Zorax rises from his seat, psychic energy visibly distorting the air around him. This is fabrication. His voice booms through the chamber, a technological trick created by a failed Heir and her human collaborators. The Quar Cherbane's translator conveys their crystalline communication. The verification protocols show these transmissions originate from Arcturian royal command channels, using encryption keys that only exist within your direct authority, High King. I demand this session be suspended. Zorax's psychic amplifiers flare dangerously, causing nearby delegates to recoil. This is an orchestrated coup against a founding council species. In the center of the chamber, Lyra stands calmly, seemingly unaffected by her father's psychic display. The evidence speaks for itself. I call for an immediate security intervention to prevent weapon deployment. The coordinates of all staging areas have been provided to council enforcement. James notices subtle movement around the chamber's perimeter as security forces begin to reposition. The Marathi delegation's chief security officer catches his eye briefly, giving an almost imperceptible nod. Ambassador, James says quietly to Chen, I believe we should move toward the secured diplomatic exit. Her eyes narrow as she reads the shifting security pattern. You were briefed on this contingency. Not explicitly, he admits, but Lyra anticipated her father wouldn't surrender power without resistance. As if confirming his words, King Zorax makes a sharp gesture toward his royal guard. Secure the chamber. No one leaves until this treachery is exposed. The first psychic attack strikes the chamber's communication array, shattering delicate equipment in a display of raw power. Delegates dive for cover as Arcturian royal guards draw weapons in direct violation of council sanctuary laws. The diplomatic exit, James repeats more urgently to Ambassador Chen. Now, as chaos erupts across the council floor, James sees Lyra activate something on her wrist device. The chamber's emergency containment protocols engage, not to trap the delegates inside, but to contain the growing psychic disturbance emanating from King Zorax and his loyalists. For better or worse, the final confrontation has begun. Years of political maneuvering, centuries of psychic dominance, all collapsing under the weight of evidence, and one princess's refusal to accept the limitations imposed upon her. 3 weeks after the council confrontation, now referred to in diplomatic circles as the Arcturus incident, James stands on the observation deck of the Earth Embassy, watching ships arrive for Lyra's coronation ceremony. Vessels from over 200 worlds fill the orbital lanes around Arcturus Prime, representing the most diverse diplomatic gathering in the planet's history. Quite the spectacle, Ambassador Chen says, joining him at the viewport. The first non-psychic ruler of Arcturus in 14 centuries, Earth's standing in the council elevated from afterthought to kingmaker. Not bad for your first diplomatic posting, Parker. James watches a crystalline core vessel maneuver into position, its faceted surface reflecting starlight in complex patterns. We nearly had interstellar war. I wouldn't call that a diplomatic success. The outcome matters in politics. Chen gestures toward the planet below, where the ancient imperial palace has been partially redesigned under Lyra's direction. Traditional psychic amplifiers now integrated with technological innovations in a symbolic merging of approaches. Her reforms are already reshaping Arcturus society. The mandatory psychic testing of children has been abolished. Technical aptitude is being recognized alongside traditional abilities. And the weapons. Council enforcement teams secured all but one of the staging areas. The final facility self-destructed before they arrived, but intelligence suggests the technology was too damaged to salvage. She studies him carefully. You don't seem particularly satisfied for someone who helped prevent galactic catastrophe. James can't articulate the strange emptiness he feels. In the chaos following King Zorax's attempted coup in the council chamber, Lyra emerged not just victorious, but transformed in the eyes of galactic society. Where once stood a disgraced princess, now stood the recognized Heir and reformer, suddenly surrounded by advisors, security teams, and administrative responsibilities. Their interactions since have been brief, formal, conducted through official channels. The transition team arrives in 20 minutes. Chen reminds him, misreading his silence, "Your presence is requested for the formal briefing." After she leaves, James remains at the viewport, watching the continual arrival of ships. A soft chime from the door interrupts his thoughts. Ambassador Parker. The embassy eye's voice holds an unusual note of uncertainty. A visitor requests entry. Security protocols are confused about proper procedure. The door slides open before he can respond, revealing Lyra. Gone are the simple gray clothes she wore during her time at the embassy, replaced by formal Arcturian attire modified with subtle technological elements. Her bioluminescent patterns glow with newfound vibrancy, pulsing in complex sequences that suggest both confidence and purpose. But it's her expression that catches him off guard. The formal mask she's maintained in official communications completely absent. "The sensor confusion is my fault," she says, stepping inside. "I modified my identification signature to bypass protocol. I needed to speak with you without 20 advisors recording every word." James finds himself momentarily at a loss. Empress Designate. This is unexpected. "Please don't." The formality in her voice vanishes. "Not between us." A silence stretches between them, filled with unspoken complexities. The galaxy has shifted around them, positions and responsibilities transformed, but the core connection formed during those months of shared exile remains. "I received your reassignment request," she finally says. "Earth Command is sending you back to the Sol system." It seemed appropriate. My original mission was completed when you were recognized as Heir. And yet I find myself needing an advisor who understands both Earth and Arcturus. Someone who sees value in integration rather than separation. Her hands, once so careful not to reveal emotion, now move with expressive emphasis. The position of Human High Chancellor remains unfilled. James stares at her in disbelief. That's a symbolic title from ancient Arcturian texts. It hasn't been used in millennia. Many things on Arcturus are changing. A smile touches her lips, including which traditions we choose to revive. Beyond the viewport, the first ceremonial lights begin to illuminate the imperial city, marking the beginning of coronation preparations. Throughout the station, across the planet, and in council chambers throughout the galaxy, species that once dismissed both humanity and a failed princess now watch with wary respect. The Galactic Council mocked when a human became heir to the king's discarded daughter. Lyra says softly, "Perhaps they'll be wiser about what comes next." James considers her offer, seeing beyond it to the larger transformation occurring throughout Arcturus space, and beyond to the shifting galactic order. The story that began with a simple act of compassion now opens into possibilities neither of them could have imagined. "Well," he says, extending his hand in the human gesture that once seemed so alien to her, "it would be a shame to waste all that diplomatic experience." As Lyra clasps his hand, her bioluminescent patterns synchronize momentarily with the embassy's lighting, technology, and biology finding harmony, much like the future they now move toward together.